Good morning, East Bay. What is happening in Alameda, Contra Costa, and Solano counties? Learn about what's happening in our communities, an in-depth conversation so you know what's going on. We're talking to government, economic, political, nonprofit, and business leaders here in the greater East Bay. I'm Jared Asch, the host of the Capstone Conversation. Welcome to this episode of the Capstone Conversation. I am your host, Jared Asch. I am here with Jim DeClo, Solano Community College. He is a professor of biotechnology. And today we're going to talk about a couple of things. It's running part of a segment with community colleges and institutes of higher education throughout the East Bay area. This is part 4 in a series on higher education here in the East Bay. If you go back and look at previous episodes, we had Kathy Sandine, the president of Cal State East Bay. We had the chancellor and board president of Contra Costa Community College. And we had Tom Epstein, the president of the board of governors of the California Community College Board. So stay tuned and join us as we hear about all these episodes on higher education in the East Bay. Next week, we'll be back with a new episode, not on higher education. Thank you for listening. What's unique about Jim's program is it's not just at a community college, it's a 4-year degree at a community college. He has good experience working with biotechnologies and economic development staff in Vacaville and South San Francisco and everything in between to help recruit businesses and constantly evolve this program in a way in working with businesses. So we're not really just talking to one professor at one community college, but we're talking to an economic development mindset person who's helping attract some of the biggest, best innovative companies into the East Bay. So with that, Professor, please introduce yourself. The episode talks a lot about science. Stay tuned. We'll explain what life science and biomanufacturing are and how they're creating jobs, attracting new businesses, and developing the workforce for the East Bay. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and the program here.
Thanks so much. And thank you so much for inviting me. So I'm Jim DeClo, and I started here 30 some odd years ago at Solano College, which is in the North San Francisco Bay. Our main campus is about halfway between San Francisco and Sacramento. Or if you're academically minded, it's halfway between UC Berkeley and UC Davis. So I was teaching biology, mainly for biology majors who were going to transfer to UC Davis. And also for pre-nursing students, I was teaching then microbiology. And then Genentech in 1994 announced they were going to build the largest manufacturing facility in the world in our county. And so I went to them and I said, well, my background is in molecular biology, in my PhD program, I isolated RNA and I made recombinant DNA. And they said, yeah, none of that's good for you anymore. That's done by PhDs in the Bay Area proper. What you need to know and what you need to teach students is the manufacturing sector of the biotech industry. They need the skills and knowledge that are required to go into what's now called biomanufacturing, although I don't remember the term having been coined at the time. And they said what they really need to know is about FDA regulation. And so I'm starting to write this on my hand. FDA regulation, they need to know TQM, they need to know QA, QC. They especially need to know GMP and how to follow an SOP and to fill out a batch production record. And so I'm writing this on my hand, and I knew it was a winner when I went to the next company, and there were a couple in our area. I was kind of thinking of incorporating regulation and business, including FDA, QA, QC, and they would visibly change their posture. That is, there were biotech programs at the time, but they taught the science, they taught the skills and knowledge required to go into the research sector of the biotech industry and not into manufacturing. So it was unique. And I told Genentech, that's all well and good, but I'm a classically trained academic. I don't really know anything about it. And they said, well, come on down and learn. I said, oh, don't offer if you don't mean it. I can apply for a sabbatical. I spent a year at Genentech filling up batch records and following standard operating procedures. working under good manufacturing practice, pharmaceutical manufacturing. I learned QA, QC. I talked to 66 different subject matter experts. They gave me a sponsor, Matt Krogan, and together he and I crafted a curriculum for teaching students what they need to know to go into the manufacturing rather than the research sector of biotechnology. And that's really what was establishing itself here. So we launched in 1997, and now I'm getting the sons and daughters of the first students there that went out with us. And we've spread this curriculum all over really the state and all over the country. I just got off the phone with my collaborator in Pennsylvania and another collaborator in Maryland. So all of the biotech faculty who teach at a community or technical college in the United States, Jared, as you implied, are on speed dial with one another so that nobody reinvents the wheel. And so they send us their standard operating procedures. We buy the same piece of equipment so we can all have a standard operating procedure. And that way we can advance the field collectively for California and really for the United States together as a team. And this field is so red hot that I figure I could quadruple or even increase tenfold and still not find the end of placements. So I think I can place everyone, even if I dramatically increased the size of the program. All of us are working together in manufacturing. And what's nice about manufacturing is that it can be achievable for our students, especially in Solano County. We're the poorest of the 9 Bay Area counties. We, in the last census, we were determined to be the most diverse county in the state of California and the most diverse county on the mainland United States outside of Hawaii. And what we can show here is that we can reach out into communities that often have very modest means and don't often are under resourced and often are neglected in a way from the tech industry. And then in a relatively short period of time, we can move those community members into a career, not a job, but a career that pays a decent starting salary. And what impresses me again and again has tremendous opportunity for upward mobility. So many of our early students now have manager behind their name or supervisor or lead. And you can move up relatively quickly if you are ambitious and find a good mentor and work extra, volunteer for projects, etc. So that's the short version of the long story of how we got started, Jared.
So, and if you weren't keeping track, even though that program started 27 years ago, Jim is only 35
Yeah.
so he started when he was brilliantly young. So you talked about good starting salaries. What is a good starting salary in that industry?
Well, so it looked better than it does recently now that In-N-Out Burger has gone up to 18 to 22. Usually they start in the sort of the mid 40,000 a year range. But usually when you're hired, you get an off shift. And it's pretty universal that the biotech companies will pay you 10% more for a swing shift and 15% more for graveyard, which likely you're stuck with anyway. With overtime, now you're in the 60,000, 70,000 maybe range. So you can move up pretty fast.
So 60 to 70,000 graduating with a 2-year community college degree or the 4-year program?
Well, so usually you start in the same place, but
Okay.
without a bachelor's degree, students will encounter what I call a paper ceiling. That is, there will be a limit that they said in order to go into this department, you'll need a bachelor's degree. Commonly, quality control labs, they need a bachelor's degree. Without a bachelor's degree, you are going to be limited in the specific job descriptions that you can answer. I hesitate to say this because I don't want to discourage anyone, because there is a place for everyone in this field. Everyone says, "Oh, well, I'm not good at science." There is, in the quality department, areas for people that, they're better at dotting I's and crossing T's. They they're good at paperwork or technical writers. Really a space for everyone, and it isn't really as sciency as it sounds. And so I don't want anyone to be intimidated by the field, because there really is a spot for everyone.
So two follow-up questions on that. What is the typical job? Somebody comes out, they get the AA degree or they get the 4-year full program, which is what you're encouraging people to do so they don't have that ceiling. Um, what is the type of work that they're doing?
It depends on where you jump in. So we have a low level certificate, and you can complete that in a semester.
Hmm.
You can get hired in a semester, but what you'll be doing there is you'll be making buffers, you'll be making solutions, you'll be making media, you'll be pouring this powdered chemical into this tank that you filled with water and turning on the mixer, and then perhaps making sure that it's sterilized, all the while following the standard operating procedure and filling out a batch record as required by the Food and Drug Administration. And where our program and others like us give students like that an advantage is they have a knowledge of pharmaceutical regulation. They know what good manufacturing practice is. They know sort of what quality assurance does and what the quality control department needs to do in order for the raw materials to go out of quarantine and to become released. Now, if you get additional schooling, then you're going to be working with big pieces of equipment, giant tanks that you fill up with media that is cell food, and then introduce cells in and have the cells grow. And then the cells will produce, typically produce a protein, and the protein is the product. The protein is the medicine. And then another team, and you'll be prepared for this as well, takes that protein and isolates it away from all of the other cellular components and isolates it away from other proteins until it's 99.99% pure. Now, if you get additional schooling, you go into the bachelor's degree and complete a bachelor's degree, then you're likely inventing the standard operating procedures. You're likely working on process development. You're taking a process out of the laboratory into commercialization. You may be working in quality control, where you're taking the final product and subjecting it to hundreds of quality control assays to prove that it has the right purity, that it's the right identity, it's the right material, and that it has the right strength. And you jump in depending on really where your family circumstances have you exit. And there are multiple entry points and multiple exit points. So what we've done is we've also negotiated with 9 different universities to have a seamless transition from our bachelor's degree candidates into their graduate programs. And we're in the high schools also teaching college classes in the local high schools. So this is a pathway, an educational pathway that goes from high school through certificate, add general education, that's an associate's degree, seamlessly into a bachelor's degree beginning to end under $10,000. And then with negotiated, some of them guaranteed admission into a graduate program. So really it's high school through PhD, multiple entry and exit points, and it depends on what your family circumstances are. We have many mothers with responsibilities, with childcare responsibilities. They're likely going to exit and make some money in order to help out the finances of their, and then go back when their children are a little older.
Is the 40 to 60,000 you were talking about sort of salary range in the beginning, is that for the 1 semester certificate or is that for the 4-year degree?
The the 1 semester certificate is going to be lower than that.
Okay.
The certificate, the full certificate or the associate's degree is going to be higher than that, or it'll be in that range. The bachelor's degree is going to be on the high end of that range.
And what's the high end of that range for the bachelor's? 60 starting for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's helpful just to put it in perspective for where people are going. Let's talk about what is these biotech life science jobs? What are they? What is this industry that everybody says is so cool and wants?
For most of the history of biotech, it's been pharmaceutical, and it started with Genentech, the first biotech company. They put in a human gene into the bacterium E. coli, and the human gene coded for insulin. Before this, Eli Lilly in Indianapolis took pig pancreases and ground them up and isolated pig insulin, and that's what you injected into yourself if you had diabetes. Now, and you can imagine that that supply is limited. Now you can make as much as you want with this genetically engineered bacterium, and it is full on human insulin. Then that was followed up by growth hormone. And what a lot of companies do now is they make antibodies. So they grow cells in giant tanks, and Genentech's tanks across the street are 3 stories tall. Picture the refinery, the truck that takes gasoline from the refinery to your local gas station. That's about the right volume for these tanks. And they're all filled with trillions of cells. All of those cells are being fed and will be making antibody. And then you have to isolate that antibody to purity. And Genentech across the street made the Regeneron antibody that was injected into patients that had severe cases of COVID. And now you don't make your own antibodies. You inject in these antibodies and the response is much faster. So some of these products are worth $1 million a gram, like granulocyte colony stimulating factor made by Amgen in Thousand Oaks. And a gram, if you hold a dollar bill in your hand, that's about a gram. And so if that was gold, it'd be $100. If that was granulocyte colony stimulating factor, that mass would be worth $1 million. So they're worth many, many times their weight in gold. And what I ask students is, who did the work for you? The genetically engineered cells. And who gets the money? You do. Catching. And so that is the main part of biotech right now. Now, what we've done here at Solano College is I overquote Wayne Gretzky, and Wayne Gretzky said, I never skated to the puck. I skated to where the puck is going to be. And so what is next? What's next? And several things are coming next. Gene therapy. In gene therapy, you take a harmless virus, you take out its own genetic material, you put in a DNA that corresponds to a gene that's missing in a child who has an inherited disorder like hemophilia. And then you build up a lot of these viruses and you inject 10 to the 15th of them into the patient, and they find their way to the right organ. For the hemophilia drug made by BioMarin, it's to the liver. And the virus, instead of invading the cell, now merely injects the right DNA. And now that patient can make their own insulin, their own factor VIII, their own clotting factor, rather than getting an injection a couple of times a week. What
So,
catch, you ask?
yeah,
$2.9 million.
yeah, I don't want our guests to be confused by the science here. Where I want to pull everybody back in is I think Jim did give a couple of examples in there, particularly around COVID, around insulin, how science is dramatically changing and the manufacturing of the drugs, the chemicals,
The therapies.
the equipment, right? All of that his students are doing here in the East Bay are leading in these technologies. And so when you look about from an economic development standpoint, what these companies are doing and the onslaught of increased science is what is leading to this job growth. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. So I talked about gene therapy, and I won't get too sciencey, but I'd like to talk about, for the first time in human history, physicians are talking the C word, a cure for cancer. So what you do is this is cell therapy, and the leading type of cell therapy is called CAR T therapy, chimeric antigen receptor T cell therapy. So what you do is you have a patient who's a month away from death. They have tumors everywhere, and these are currently solely approved for types of leukemia. But you pull out their white blood cells, you put their white blood cells to boot camp. That is, you genetically engineer their own white blood cells to display on the surface of those cells a protein receptor specific for their cancer. You grow up a bunch of them, put them back into the patient, the white blood cells, their own white blood cells that have been genetically engineered, actually with a derivative of HIV, their own white blood cells go around and kill all the cancer cells, certain death to tumor free in a month. Again, what's the catch? Currently $500,000. But we need to train people that have the ability to manufacture these therapies. And that's what we're doing here at Solano College. We're training the students that will go into this manufacturing. And I'm on several national workforce committees. And when I talk to companies, I said, I don't know why you're not scared that you won't have enough people to produce these new therapies that are coming out. I don't know why you're not scared that there aren't enough trained people to do this. And they'll tell me, oh no, I am scared. I am scared. There are some threats that some of the therapies will not be available to patients because there just aren't enough people that know how to produce them.
There's a big workforce angle and component in there that we're talking about. Coming up, we have an episode with actually the national CEO and president of the National Workforce Development Association. This is a great example of where workforce agencies can help plug people into a program like Solano Community College. There are jobs out here. There is growing demand. We're talking about mixing chemicals together, though. Can't a computer or a robot measure this stuff? Check a box, stir the pot, nice and hot, ready to go. Then it pours it over. Isn't this right for robots?
Yes and no. So artificial intelligence will be applied to do the boring things, but that still means that you'll need humans to do the interesting things. So students, of course, ask me this all the time. They ask me two things. Will I be automated out of a job? And will my job be outsourced overseas? And to which I say no and no. So I am less afraid of you being automated out of a job than I am about long distance truck drivers, or about supermarket clerks, or about the people that take your order at fast food, or about that. That is, there's much less potential here for being replaced by artificial intelligence, I think, than many, many, many fields, because you're still going to need someone to watch over the equipment, to make the call if the machine doesn't catch it. Something doesn't seem right here. There's plenty of opportunities, and again, new therapies and new applications coming up everywhere.
Eh, And I'll just do a total tangent here, but I actually just had coffee with a regional manager of 22 Safeways.
Hmm.
And he was saying that the self checkout is actually being reduced in a lot of places because people cheat. Apparently, people switch labels. They scan the same cheaper item 2 or 3 times and don't scan the expensive item. Oops, they forgot to scan an item, leading to a lot of hidden theft that way. And he said in San Francisco and Oakland and other cities, they're starting to remove the automated registers and go back to that. And that is reducing theft.
And
There will
that
still be a need for cashiers in a lot of places, but not at McDonald's because it's all a tablet electronic interface that remembers what you're ordering. So life sciences, more solid foundation to your job use in a growing industry here.
So there's a
So,
couple of other fascinating emerging areas. One is cultivated meats, and my son works for Upside Foods. He's making chicken cells in a tank without chicken. So the chicken who contributed that chicken cell stem cell may still be alive. And you make patties out of it, and it tastes like chicken because it is chicken. There are these areas of alternative meats and alternative proteins. We're going to make protein using fungal cells, and it's a really high quality protein. And what's interesting is here from where I am in Vacaville, 15 miles away, is UC Davis. UC Davis is emerging as the national leader, but perhaps the international leader in cultivated meats and alternative proteins. It'll be very, very interesting to see how that shakes out. A lot of my students are going into that as well. The other thing that's coming up, and this was the subject of President Biden's executive order last September, is the development of a bioeconomy that is to get living cells to produce not medicines this time, but to produce other commodity chemicals like fuels, the molecules that currently are coming out of petrochemicals that are the precursors that you make plastics from, to make all molecules produced by cells in giant tanks. And the projections there are really, really wild. $4 trillion a year industry, up to a $30 trillion a year global bioeconomy in the next few decades. To put that in perspective, the current GDP of the United States is 21 trillion. So you're talking about a new industry that is barely on the radar right now, that in a short period of time, that is in the lifetime of your readers, has the potential to be larger by 50% than all the goods and services currently sold in the United States. And anyway, that is what the analysis shows. So those are going to need a lot of people. Jared, what I do, and you mentioned economic development, I work closely with the city of Vacaville and with the Solano County Economic Development Corporation. And if a company from anywhere in the world is looking for a spot, then we invite them to come to Vacaville or to another city here in the East Bay and to take a look and to see if we can provide them with a spot. Our interest, my interest, of course, is to provide more high paying jobs for my students and to have them not commute. I'll show them our 4-suite biotech training facility, which is in a new $34 million science biotech building, and I will introduce them to some students. And often, after doing that, the city of Vacaville says workforce is the closer. That someone who is maybe okay, it looks good, and the city of Vacaville looks like they're easy to work with, and they guarantee permitting within 3 months. That sounds positive. But when they see that there is a local steady supply of workforce, then that is often what seals the deal. And so we've attracted 4 biotech companies to Vacaville in the last year and a half.
all right. So if I'm the city of Concord or the city of Livermore and I'm looking at duplicating those 4 life science companies and recruiting them into their cities, which is a lot of the listeners are wondering, how do they create these life science and biotech jobs? What advice would you give to a mayor, a city manager, economic development person in any of those cities?
I'll give you a specific example of a project that I think is brilliant, and that's in Stanislaus County, and it's the city of Modesto. So the city of Modesto, their board of supervisors, all 5 of them unanimously voted to put $10 million of recovery funds into a project to attract biotech companies in the bioeconomy. And then they recently secured $5 million in addition to that. And of course, their interest is to develop careers, to develop high paying careers that when you do the analysis, the Central Valley is poor. I've heard it sometimes called the Appalachia of the West. And so what they've done is they put together committees. They put together a workforce committee that I'm participating in on how to develop comparable training programs for them. They're putting together an economic development committee, a technical committee. They have the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab involved. They have a component of that, ABPDU, involved, and they're bringing in Modesto Junior College. They're bringing in Cal State Stanislaus. They're bringing in University of California, Merced, and all coordinating in one big effort to attract companies. And they're going to springboard off of, they have Gallo there, which is, if you think about it, alcoholic beverages are biotech. You take a sugary solution that isn't worth very much, you put in a living cell, a yeast, a unicellular fungus, and then the yeast converts the sugar to alcohol, and now you can mark it up many-fold, and you put a fancy enough label on it, and you can mark it up to $100 a bottle or something. That is value added, and that is a non-pharmaceutical application of biotech. What they're doing is they're looking at these commodity chemicals and building and trying to build an economy around that. They don't have some of the advantages that, say, Concord would have with proximity to institutions of higher education. If you look at biotech companies, most biotech companies are clustered around a University of California campus.
There's two key takeaways there from economic development. One, Modesto's actually putting 15 million plus into recruiting businesses, and they're creating an economic development working group that's covering the region, that's bringing in educators, that's bringing in all of these other components in the community to create a new culture out there. Or a lot of the
Well,
cities
by
here,
the
I
way,
want you to
it's called Beam Circular if you want to look it up.
beam circular, and we'll link to that in the show notes for our listeners. A- as you think about this in your city, I would challenge all the people here who want life science companies. What are you doing to ensure the workforce is here and to partner with the right UCs or somebody like the professor here with your community college to develop this industry and recruit it? What are you doing to build a council and partner with other companies there? You said one key word, which I've heard before in the space, is companies like to cluster around this.
Mhm.
Talk about the benefit of clustering in sectors around that, because I want economic development people to hear that.
Yeah, it's not very different than, why would you make a movie in Hollywood, right? Because Los Angeles, the costs are high. Well, if you need expertise, especially in the days of film, I need this ultra special film. I just go down the street, and biotech companies are kind of like that in that, oh, we have specialty equipment. I need someone who can fix it. Oh, well, someone's close because we have lots of biotech company. We have enough biotech companies here to support an entire ecosystem.
And I
Uh,
think that's important. And that comes up. A good friend of mine, Ed Del Beccaro at TRI Commercial Real Estate, he talks about the 4-hour window to Tesla, that Tesla requires any of their suppliers to be able to get their parts to the Fremont headquarters securely and safely in under 4 hours. Now, that 4 hours could be in San Leandro, really close to it, but it also could be in Ventura if you put enough shipping and logistics centers around it. What we're talking about with the biotech clusters here is that those other parts, those other manufacturing, the supply chain is around here. And if you think back to, what was it, 2008, when the car companies were testifying before Congress about how they need an industry to support them. Ford was saying, we're actually in better shape than Chrysler and GM financially. But what happens is, without the two of them, the full supply chain, the tire manufacturer, the key fob guys, the battery people, they all go under and or need us to pay in cash up front, and it totally impacts Ford. And the same thing that the companies are looking at here in a relative scale. But that's why they like to cluster. And that's why they also want government entities and community colleges and others to work together.
Right. When I go to the International Biotechnology meeting, it's in San Diego this year, and I man the California booth. And of course, people from other states come and they very, very much like to badmouth California. You know, they say, California, the costs are so high, regulatory burden. Why would I come to California? And I'll say, well, there must be a good reason because biomanufacturing increased 11% last year. There is a good reason to cluster. And same thing with Silicon Valley. Why would you start a company, a tech company in Silicon Valley? Well, because you can have coffee with somebody in a half hour, and you can go to the homebrew computer festival, and you can, there is something about face-to-face talent that Zoom will never replace. And so that there is a clustering here, and we see it in Vacaville.
For all the companies that they say Silicon Valley loses to techs, particularly Austin comes up, right? They those companies still keep their brain trusts here. So they might move their headquarters and they might move operations, but rest assured, the smartest people and the people inventing the most at companies like Meta and Google are all still here. Yeah.
And biotech has the same phenomenon. Yeah.
Our typical audience is elected officials in the East Bay, business leaders in the East Bay, Chamber of Commerce, nonprofit leaders. What message do you want to give to them that they should be aware of about the biotech industry in your program?
I have a few things, and part of them is from my role nationally on workforce committees, and part of it is local. There isn't an awareness of this field. And so I'll give you some examples. There are some programs similar to mine in the East Bay that are likely to be disbanded and dismantled in the near future. And part of it is, even though you can kind of guarantee that you can certainly guarantee that you're going to get a an interview at the end of the program, but you can kind of guarantee that I'm going to get you into the industry somewhere, but no one knows about that. That is, everyone knows what a doctor does, everyone knows what a nurse does. No one knows what a biotechnologist does. Awareness is like that. And then what's coming out in the national literature out of the White House and elsewhere out of Congress is, if we don't support this at the local, state, and national level, China is going to eat our lunch in this field. China has a major biotech business park outside of every city, gigantic. They're training talent, and what I like is they're not our adversaries, they're our rivals. You need to look at them like Michigan, Ohio State, and it's like the space race. They're going to push us to do better, if that makes sense.
That's actually a good message. Where do people learn more about your program and reach out to you?
We do have a web presence, or Jared, let me give you my email, and they can contact me directly. And just let me leave the audience with this. The promise of this field is new therapies that reach people who have unmet medical needs. That is, their disease currently has no treatment. Let me say, I didn't say has no cure, has no treatment. There are still many diseases that medical science doesn't have anything we can do for you if you gain that disease. And this prospect is, we're for the first time talking about the C word, a cure for cancer. We are talking about alleviating human sufferings. We're talking with stem cells about the disabled will walk. With gene therapy, the blind will see, the deaf will hear. We're talking about making fundamental changes in the human condition and alleviating suffering. With inherited disorder, the suffering usually falls upon children. I spent a lot of time at Oakland Children's Hospital with parents. It's a center for genetic disorders. What kept those parents going was knowing that someone was working on it. And so the other thing that this field brings is hope.
I think you laid out a big case for investing in the sector, right? I mean, we're talking locally and people are thinking economic development, but you're talking fighting cancer, genetic diseases, competing with the Chinese, solving plastics, building
Solving
chicken.
plastics. Yeah. A lot has been said about this upcoming generation, not all of it complimentary. But what I have learned to be true is the upcoming generation doesn't merely want to make a paycheck. They want to quote Steve Jobs, make a ding in the universe. They want to make a difference. And here is a field where you can get a paycheck and make a difference. But we have to let them know about it.
I appreciate you being here, Professor DeClo from Solano Community College. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks for inviting me.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today.